Today on Biblical Higher Ed Talk, I sit down with Bryce Ashlin-Mayo, the newly seated president of Ambrose University, to discuss what his transition to the college presidency was like. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm your host, Philip Dearborn, president of ABHE, and we are honored to have as our guest this week, Bryce Ashlin-Mayo. He is the new president of Ambrose University in Calgary, Canada. ABHE's reach is in the United States, but we also have 19 institutions north of the border in the wonderful country of Canada that I've had opportunity to visit on several occasions, and was actually on your campus a couple years ago, had a delightful visit. We all know that presidential transitions are happening at a faster rate. In fact, for ABHE institutions, the average stay of a president this past year went from 9.6 to 8.6 years. So even in our sector, we're seeing a number of transitions happening in that top seat. And I've invited Bryce in to talk about his presidential transition. And I know a lot of our listeners are younger leaders who are in various positions, and some of them aspiring perhaps to be a college president one day. And so I thought it would be a great conversation to actually have a chat with somebody who has recently made that transition. I've interviewed other presidents who have been in the seat for 10, 15, 20 years. They're reflecting back. What would they do differently? But I thought it would be neat to talk to somebody who's months after the transition to kind of pick his brain on that experience. So Bryce, welcome to the show.
Hi, Philip. It's good to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. So before we get into some of the questions here, just a shout out to Logos Bible Software. They are a powerful product and great partners with ABHE, and we really do appreciate their sponsorship of this particular show. So Bryce, when you were a youngster going through grade school, I highly doubt that at the top of your list someday was that you were going to be a university president, but here you are. So tell us about some of those twists and turns that God used to shape you to assume the presidency.
Pretty stark difference than when I was in kindergarten and wanted to be an astronaut. Maybe more similarities than maybe one would think. That was my dream when I was in kindergarten. No, yeah, like all the twists and turns, like this is not the trajectory I would have imagined for my life 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 5 years ago. But yet here I am in this seat for this time at the institution. Yeah, just all the different places that your life takes you. And oftentimes it takes you to a place you didn't or would never even have imagined. Not that it's bad or it's amazing, but I would never have picked this 10 years from now or 10 years ago.
Yeah. So what were some of the specific things that God used that kind of propelled you and pointed you in this direction? Was it something that you resisted? Was it something that you could kind of see, okay, God is starting to build something here. I'm not quite sure what it is.
In my experience, for me, it wasn't a resisting. It was just a different trajectory in my life. Like if I were to go back in a DeLorean time machine 3 years ago, I was a local church pastor, actually in a church probably 20 minutes from campus here. Still live in the same house I lived in when I was pastoring. And I wouldn't have necessarily then imagined I would, before I was president here, was dean for a couple of years of theology. I wouldn't imagine that, let alone imagine being president. I figured I would be a pastor probably to the end of my career, maybe in a larger church, or maybe serve in district leadership of some kind or national leadership of some kind for our denomination. Didn't think or have like aspirations of the president of the school is literally in my backyard even. It was that physically close, yet that job just didn't seem like it was the next logical thing, at least like 3 years ago. But then God kind of led me through a series of events to leave pastoral ministry and come be the dean of theology, overseeing our undergraduate ABHE programs, or our seminary programs here at our university, and did that for 2 years. But about a year into that, the current president, or the past president, my predecessor, decided that he was ready for retirement and was going to leave a couple of years before the end of his term. So all of a sudden that opportunity came forward. I wasn't necessarily in my plan or even timeline for me or the institution, but they went through their search process and I entered into that based on some leading I had from the Lord at the time and others who encouraged me to do that, and then did my discernment. And now I'm in this seat. as the new president of Ambrose.
Talk to us on the personal level of this, conversations with your wife, family about this. How did she react to the possibilities? Was it an immediate, oh yeah, I see you in that? Was there a hesitation? Talk to us about that piece of the transition.
Yes, that's interesting because my wife was on staff here for about 5 or 6 years. And up until recently, when I became president, then she stepped off of staff. But for those years in advance, so she had a really good sense of the institution. And she would say, this is the right step for you, Bryce. Like total affirmation. This is the right thing. Even for her, we determined it wasn't best for her to stay in her role here. And even with the loss of that for her, and she's landed in a different role now in a different organization. But that was for her, it was a sense of this is the next thing for our family, and it's the next thing for you to lead. And I can see how all of the different things in your life and your career has led you to this place to serve in the institution we both love. Yeah, and her love for this is her friends and this institution that she's worked with and has served with for a number of years.
So helpful to have that validation in that journey along that this is the right next step. Maybe along the way there was some like, okay, do I really want to do this? Those validations along the way certainly helpful.
I knew that I would have those moments because every president I talked to, everyone who was a president before always told me like there's a leading of the Lord, but there's constant doubts along the way, even when you're in the job. Like I talked to one president who was like, almost every day I thought about just giving up. It's unrelenting and difficult. So I wrote a letter to myself. I keep it on my phone. I have it printed out. And when I sensed the Lord leading and accepted the position before it was public, I have a letter that I pull out and read probably monthly, sometimes daily, depends on the season, how the Lord led me, the different opportunities I've had in my life that's led me to this position, and why I sense this is where the Lord would have me, as a reminder to myself of the Lord's leading. And it's been really helpful.
Yeah, that is such a great practice. And to you younger leaders out there who are growing in your leadership, there's all kinds of leadership lesson in what you just shared there. One is to have physical connections to validate the call that you are in. And I love the imagery of having that letter and reading it to yourself because look, the reality is, and I think too often leaders are attracted to the romance of leadership, like all of the highlights of leadership. But reality is they're just highlights. They're seconds of highlights in the scheme of, a lifetime of service. And it's important to be reminded of, oh yeah, this circumstance isn't going to sink my ship. It may be difficult, got to work through this, but no, God has called me to this.
Yeah, leadership is kind of like the family road trip. That sounds amazing. If you think about it, it's going to be great. We have all these memories and experience, play all these games in the vehicle, and we're going to travel whenever it is, 24 hours, whatever you're going. This long road trip together in the vehicle. And then you drive in about 2 hours and you'll pay whatever dollar it would cost to fly everyone to the end just to get out of the vehicle together. That's kind of like leadership. There's times where it is amazing and you get to see the sights and you'll take the photos and you'll remember those moments. But there are times where it's just difficulties, there's conflict, there's challenges. You'll wonder if you'll ever be able to make it. You'll wonder if you'll be able to get from gas station to gas station. You wonder all those different things that you would want on a road trip. But that's the calling of God, is to sometimes take those challenges and embrace all the joys, but also to endure. And that's actually, I think, what good leaders do. They just are really good at enduring pain or uncomfortability. There's times when I've been in meetings and I'm like, I just need to get to the end of this meeting. Instead of as we're going to do all these amazing things, I just need to get to the end of the day. At the end of the day, I'll celebrate how God's been a part of it, but I just got to get to the end of the day.
Yeah. We were just had our president's conference this fall, and one of the presidents, actually one of the Canadian presidents, in a similar kind of vein, said he has a daily prayer for himself. It sounds kind of flippant, but it's not. But he reminds God that this was his idea in the first place. I like how that takes it off of us as individuals and points it to, no, you know what? We're just fulfilling what God, you called us to do. This is your work. I'm a steward of this. And my prayer today is to remind you, God, that this was your idea.
I think it was an ABHE when I was with all the academic deans when I was deans at one of their the professional development gatherings we did in Orlando. Somebody mentioned this, the prayer that they've been praying lately. God, make my day so difficult I can't do it without you. And then just at the end of the day, well, God, you answered my prayer. So I guess it was success, because there is just truth to that. There is just truth of, I tell young leaders here all the time, leadership is hard. And if it's hard, it doesn't mean you're doing it bad, or it doesn't mean you're a bad leader. Leaders are people who endure the hard. It's not that because something view, if you're a good leader, all these things will be easy. Yeah. Like, no, it's just good leaders are able to endure, keep hope alive, move an institution forward in the hard. And it is just hard work.
It is. It is. And I think one of the contributing pieces to it that makes it hard is, we've heard this term before. It's an axiom of leadership. It's probably overused, but there's a whole lot of value. There's truth to it, is leadership is a lonely place. And so in those moments, you don't have necessarily the validation of others around you who are saying, no, that was the right decision. Or no, you can keep on going. You're good. The further away you get from some of those and become that senior leader, it kind of stops with you. And there is a loneliness about that, but it's important to have those structures around you then.
One of the weird parts, that the little like nuance of the loneliness of a leader, especially a senior leader, like a university or college president, like there's some people, there's a handful of trusted people I would have around here. And because I come in with existing relationships, that's a unique part of my journey. But there's a number of people who will come and be very encouraging and very affirming, but they come with an agenda. And as a senior leader, like, they want to teach here. They want me to endorse something. They want, like, so even in those circumstances, it seems like, oh, there's a warm and friendly and encouraging voice. There's always a sense of like, is that, like, where's the motivation behind it? And then you can become so skeptical that you just push all of that away, which is also bad. But you can't just assume that all of that's good, or you'll live in a constant state of disappointment when people disappoint you that, oh, they actually just wanted to come and teach for Ambrose, or wanted a job or an opportunity or whatever. So that's always the nuance in I think the leader is lonely dynamic.
And you don't want to get jaded in that process. And you raise that point that, look, they're genuine people and they do have an agenda. They do have an interest, but sometimes you wish they were more upfront with it, so you didn't have to try to figure it all out. But that's leadership. So talk to us about some of the formational leadership experiences that you would say, you know what, looking back, that really shaped me well for the seat that I'm in.
Well, one of the realities of any university president is fundraising. And I'm learning that, like, it's a whole different thing. Like, I have a lot of money I got to raise every year, and that keeps me up at night. But part of the background of that is, as a church pastor, I did that as a pastor would. It's different. But I had some experience with Habitat for Humanity. I led a couple projects and kind of kicked one off the ground in a town that I once pastored in, and had to go raise the hundreds of thousands of dollars we need to build houses. That was a lot of individual asks. That was a good learning experience that I wouldn't have had as a pastor, to kind of at least give me a sense of what are good practices for that, how to go about those conversations, et cetera. So that part of it was key. Part of Ambrose, part of our programming is accredited by the government here. Our arts and science programming is accredited by the Alberta government, and we receive grant money from them to do that. We're a publicly funded, not a public institution, but a publicly funded institution as a part of what we do. Well, I have a whole government advocacy, government relations part of my job that I had some experience with some work that I did with the provincial government with one of my children who has a disability. And I sat on a provincial advisory committee for the provincial government, which at least helped me understand how to be in those places, because that's a new place for me, where I sit down in all of the public universities in the province here, and I sit with their presidents, and we advocate with each other and to the government. So that's a unique thing, and those things led me to that. I think people skills, my role as a pastor is key for that. Ambrose kind of needed both. Ambrose is the official school of two denominations. We're a denominational school for two different denominations. And so I have two different ecclesial worlds that I'm constantly navigating. And it'd be really difficult, not impossible, but difficult if you didn't know those cultures and those worlds. And then my academic writing and background experience that I had is kind of sessional instructions here at the institution led me to this. So all of these threads led to this particular moment.
Yeah. And I think a good lesson for younger listeners is use the opportunity that you're in, recognizing that is going to shape the future, and seek out those opportunities, right? Some of them are natural. Like you said, with your child who has special needs, there was advocacy that you wanted to be a part of because of that individual's needs. So you engaged with the government. Well, that is shaping you for what ultimately God has put you in for the seat. So be looking for those opportunities to kind of stretch yourself beyond just what your job responsibilities are, and use those as learning opportunities. You never know how God is going to use them.
Yeah. And look for opportunities outside your comfort range to say yes to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just like try, say yes. I think that's always good advice for people, and just see what the Lord will do.
Yeah. So let's talk about the actual transition into the presidency. So you're fresh off this, and I realize there's probably some things that would not be appropriate to share on a podcast for the rest of the world to hear. Within that context, there is a gap between expectation and reality.
Oh, sure.
What expectations fell short of reality now that you're the president?
I think a couple just generic ones that I think are just would be fair. I think the gap probably of what I thought of there being for margin, like margin to with my time, because my time is now not my own, really. I was used to having lots of time for I thought I could keep that, and that's no longer the case. It's just the nature of the job. I would say that would be one of them. One of them would be.
So let me stop you there. Like how? So okay, that's a good one. That's great.
Yeah.
So you thought, based off of your experiences, you probably had a freer schedule. You had control over that schedule. So then how? As you stepped into that, how have you adjusted how you lead then so that doesn't become the tyranny of the urgent for you?
Yeah, for me, it's trying to keep kind of good conversation with my wife on one hand in our family schedule, and my EA on the other hand, who kind of manages my personal schedule, just to make sure that I'm taking time off. One of the things I'm learning is when I go away, so if I'm going away to meet with donors or have other meetings, my tendency is I would just book that up like constantly with people. And then I could just be literally working 12 hours a day for 7 days a week. Then I got to come back to campus and I got to catch up because I have all my direct reports to connect with, meetings I got to be at, all those things. And I don't have time on that end. And what does it mean to have margin, even if it's going to a movie in an evening while I'm on the road, just by myself, just so that I can have some personal downtime or have a chance to do personal writing or reflection or whatever, just trying to make sure I'm writing in margin in a healthy way, because it'll just get filled up if you don't.
Exactly. And I've discovered that in my leadership of ABHE with all of the travel that's required, you're putting in long days, and the tendency is to look, if I'm out, I'm going to maximize it and see as many people as I possibly can. You do that, you come back, you're exhausted. You're absolutely exhausted. So building in that margin is critical. So continue on. So what, and any other unrealized expectations?
I would just maybe to take that margin one step further, like time is one thing, but then also finances. You have all of these dreams you want to do, and you think, oh, I can reallocate resources. And it's the thing you find it's actually not that simple. There's a reason why your predecessor struggled to also do their things that they were trying to do. And the person before that, and the person before that, and the person after you will. It's just the nature of you have less and less margin, which is just difficult. And so kind of oh, how do I do this without maybe the perceived margin that I have? Mm-hmm. So that too would be probably a gap in expectation. The number of things were more complex than I thought they were. Mm-hmm. Okay. And other things are simpler than I thought they were. The sense that oh, this decision seems like it would be so obvious if I was in that seat. And then you get in the seat and it's oh, actually there's 10 layers to this I was clueless of in my other role. And now it's so more complex than I thought it was. Then other things I'd be oh, that just seems like it's totally complicated and it's going to take me forever to get my mind around. Totally. Turns out it's really, really simple and it's just a bit disorientating. And so that gap too of defining what's complex and simple is something that's taking a while to organize.
That's a powerful one, because I've often, and with my experiences, and this is how I was mentored in my leadership, the higher I went in leadership, my mentor would talk about if a decision is coming to your desk and it seems simple, it probably isn't, because somebody else in the decision-making line probably would have made that decision already. But it's coming to your desk and it's not simple. So you've got to figure out and diagnose, why is this not a simple decision? And then you discover the layers. But I've never heard somebody articulate, and I love it, that you anticipated that some decisions would be difficult and they actually are easy.
Yeah. Well, it's just this whole problem, this thing seems like it's really complicated, and it turns out it's actually not. And my perception of it being really complicated was just false. Yeah. I'm actually, there's less layers to this situation than I thought there was.
Yeah. Yeah. So lots of adjusting. So you're adjusting on the fly, learning. And I would imagine too, how long have you been in the seat of president?
About 6 months.
6 months. So, we're talking not even a year yet, right? And you'll have the benefit in another 6 months of actually going through the whole cycle, which is really important. Then you can, in future cycles and years, know, okay, I know that this is going to be crunch time. I've got to really buckle in, knowing that down the road there could be some margin. You're doing a lot of adjusting on the fly. What surprised you the most in assuming the presidency? What didn't you expect that was a surprise, either a good or a bad one?
Sure. The amount of reporting.
Okay.
Just the sheer, well, and maybe that's unique to well, that's probably the same for everyone. But like I said before, so Ambrose has 4 accrediting bodies. So you just think of if your only accreditor is the ABHE, like one of our accreditors, you have all of that. But we have 3 others of them that we also are doing. Plus, I have 2 denominational families, ecclesial families, that I'm constantly reporting to all their districts or their and being at all their events. All of those, like the sheer volume of reporting is like I'm writing. Okay, in reports. That's just a general word, but even like my presidential report that I'll do, some of them are 10 pages. I'm probably doing a version of that, and my EA helps me with that probably every month, every 2 months, just constantly. The amount of reporting. I was not anticipating that. So just getting my mind around trying to get good rhythms to constantly be doing that. But yeah, the reporting is definitely one of them.
What about positive surprise? The
opportunities for relationship. I really appreciate the opportunity to get to know people. And that's the part of the fundraising job, which is its own, that's a big number. And how am I going to fill that number? But it's also that number is filled with people. So I get to hang out with a lot of people and talk about what I love with those people. And they want to know about what I love. That's its own unique surprising gift of the role of president, is I get to go and talk to people about vision that God has given me, the excitement I have for my institution. And they care. They want to hear that. And that, I think, has been a fun part of my job. The fundraising has its challenges,
sure,
but there is a side of that in the relationship that is pretty awesome.
Yeah. And that's so beautifully said. So many, and we have multiple conferences on this. We have advancement officer conferences on Terry Mundy, who just did a phenomenal job as a fundraiser at Indiana Wesleyan University. I've had conversations with him. And yeah, there are the nuts and bolts of fundraising where there is a definite science to it, that you've got to go in, you got to be able to make the ask, you got to ask, you can't leave the person guessing, why is this person here? But so much of it is built off of a relationship, and you passionately sharing what you're passionate about, and you're passionate about the vision that you have for Ambrose. And here's an opportunity to talk, to be across from the table or in the living room or in a restaurant somewhere, being able to share that vision with somebody who has resource and capacity that will fuel that vision. That's pretty energizing.
Yeah. And it builds its own momentum. It is. I find actually, usually at those meetings, I'm amped up. And it's because I get to talk about what I love to someone who cares about what I love.
Yeah.
That's its own kind of fun gift. In the midst of all the weight of the fundraising things.
Yeah.
It's the people that you get to connect with.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there's a little life lesson in there, I think, or leadership lesson, that if you're going to step into a leadership role, you got to make sure that you're passionate about the role that you stepped into and the organization that you're a part of, because you can probably fake it for a little bit, but give it a couple of months. And if you're not passionate about it or the direction or vision, you're just going to be absolutely miserable.
Find common language for yourself to be able to share that. Because that's the one thing, the last thing I want is to share different messages to different people. I'd actually rather be oh, Bryce came and he gave me these 5 things. Be oh, he said the same thing to me. That actually is a win. I'm actually saying the same thing, and that builds over time. But I think that's the piece of finding your, this sounds bad, but your pitch, your story, your narrative that you're sharing about the institution and where you want to see it go. I think trying to nail that down so that it's natural and flowing, and you can customize it to that person, but it has the same skeleton that you're using, and that people can then trust you and what you're saying, and that you'll execute on those things.
So reflecting back, what would you say is one thing, and again, realizing you're in the position for 6 months, but reflecting back, what's one thing you do differently?
I probably give myself a lot more grace. I thought I needed to figure things out in my first week. And I've even now at the 6-month mark, there's areas I'm I hope I'll figure that out over the long term. But certain things, it's I actually didn't even need to worry about that in my first week. And you don't even know what those are. And to trust the people around you, just to have a conversation with your cabinet or whoever and just be hey, help me to know what I should be diving into. What are the key things? Because I can't do everything, and I could spin my wheels trying to figure something out that doesn't really matter right now. because I think it does and it doesn't. And so I think that's the piece of it, is just to give yourself grace, to enjoy things more. Tell Bryce to chill out. It's going to be okay. You'll figure it out over time. You don't need to know all the things about that issue in this exact moment.
Yeah.
The layers will form as the weeks and months and years go on.
Yeah. The imagery, I can't help but think of this. So we're brand new grandparents, which is a gift all in itself. But Amy and I have had conversations about, the first time when you're raising your own kids, you're like in this, you got to do everything right. And you're caught more in the process of it. And when you have grandkids now, it's like, wow, you can really, because things are going to work themselves out as the journey continues, and you can just see things totally differently. So that's my prayer for you in this, and I love the fact that you raised it, is just give yourself grace. And maybe it's in that letter that you've written to yourself to be constantly reminded of the calling that God has placed. So, Bryce, we have 2 minutes left. This has been a fabulous conversation. So a lot of young listeners to our podcast who are at various journeys of their leadership experiences. Give us 3 words of advice that you would give to them as they're learning leadership.
Maybe a couple things I would say, like say yes to opportunities and give it your best shot. Mm-hmm. Work hard at it. I think in every season of your life, get a mentor or a coach. This is the first thing I did as president, is I found a coach who's been a godsend to me, like just a huge blessing. So I think any young leader, anyone in any position who is a person, whether you pay them or they're just somebody in your life, find a mentor or coach. I think it's key. And then I just think keep moving forward. Organizations and leadership, like leading organizations, I always say to my students, is kind of like a shark. Sharks need to always be moving forward. Otherwise they die. That's how they breed. Organizations are the same thing. So even if it's not 100% right, you can course correct. So just like the worst thing you can do is stall. So just keep going and course correct along the road, and it'll be okay. The Lord will lead you. You can course correct, but just don't stop, because when you stop, you suffocate an organization. And there's too many leaders that get stuck in that for whatever reason. Just try, move forward and go, and let the Lord lead you as you grow.
Yeah, that's great advice. That's a book in itself right there. And I think momentum is a crazy thing, isn't it? Where it takes so much energy and inertia and resource to get moving. And stop is not good. Well, Bryce, this has been a fabulous conversation. I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and your experiences with us. God has clearly prepared you for this role and this moment of leadership. And I've been able to walk a little bit of the journey with you along the way. So thank you for joining us for this episode.
My pleasure. And God bless everybody. And thank you, Philip, for your friendship and for the work of ABHE, the great work of ABHE. Much appreciated.
Again, a shout out to Logos Bible Software. We really do appreciate their partnership with ABHE. If you're looking for a good Bible software, there's probably nobody better than Logos. You can click on the link that we provide in the show description, information about Logos, but also about Ambrose University. So until next time, stay kingdom focused.